Hi, and welcome to What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I'm going to break down the 3 habits you'll need to unlearn if you really want to scale your revenue and impact without the constant overwhelm and threat of burnout. I want to start by just introducing myself and sharing a little bit about how I came to be with you today. Nonprofits and specifically growing nonprofits, that's my happy place. It's in my blood. I got bitten by the bug early as a freshman in college. I interned at the New York office of the ACLU my freshman summer, and we were stuffed into this tiny office just outside of Bryant Park. If you are watching this and you are from New York in the 90s, you may remember that it wasn't actually that pretty. It's beautiful now. I got to hear everything. I followed the ED around to meetings and I sat in on budget and strategy calls, and I was hooked. I co founded my first organization while I was still in law and graduate school at Harvard. And I learned through trial by fire, raising money, translating opaque legal justice issues into something people could actually give money to support. We were pairing law students and graduate students with schools to do casework and to create legislation, and bringing together all of those diverse stakeholders and building and scaling programming. It was a lot and I loved it. And I knew from that experience that finding solutions to social problems, and particularly starting and working with social enterprises and nonprofits, that was my calling. I got a fellowship to move to New York and to design and launch a public interest law initiative. I was partnering with lawyers and teachers and community organizers to protect the rights of teen parents to stay in school. And what I learned from that experience actually laid the groundwork for what would be my next initiative. So by the mid 2000s, I'd started working on my second organization, training teenagers to build social impact initiatives in response to issues they experience in their schools and communities. I grew that organization for more than 12 years, started with me and an intern in this tiny little rental office and just a handful of donations from friends. And I grew that to a truly amazing 13-person team, an incredible and engaged board, raising millions of dollars in revenue along the way. I became a graduate professor of social impact law and social entrepreneurship and an organizational design strategist and executive coach. And since 2017, that is what I've been doing. I stepped down as CEO of my organization and became a strategist and coach full time. And for the last 7 years, I've been running Bending Arc, which is my social impact firm. I support nonprofit leaders in launching and growing high impact nonprofits. So I say all of this to say that my journey has been a long one, but it has a through line. And the through line has been my deep commitment to supporting mission driven work. One thing I also want to lift up about my story is that I've been where you are. I've traveled this path multiple times as a board member, as a nonprofit founder. I know in my bones what it feels like to commit to a mission and for that mission to feel urgent and for you to give everything you have. And I also know how good it feels to look around at something that you and your team are helping to shape that's actually impacting people's lives. And I know how hard it is to know what to do sometimes. And so that's where I come in. I think we're all here for a purpose, and mine is to take what I've experienced and what I've learned and what I've done to help passionate leaders start and scale and lead organizations that can really change the world. My superpower, how I do it, is strategy. It's my love language. I love bringing order to chaos. I love sitting in the messiness of vision and ideas. It's like an open field, and translating that energy into a blueprint, into a plan for powerful action. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to walk through the unlearnings or the shifts that you're going to need to make as you navigate the sometimes chaotic process of growing your organization if you want to set yourself up for stability and sustainability in the long run. Now, I've got a great high impact training for you today. We're going to talk about how to know where you are in your organization's life cycle and why that's important. We're going to talk about the single most important finance strategy you will ever use to continue to stabilize yourself as you grow. And we're going to be talking about the difference between high leverage and low leverage leadership. Now, I call this training What Got You Here Won't Get You There. When it comes to scaling your organization in a sustainable way, nothing could be more true. Now, which of these sounds like you? Maybe you've been growing your organization, right? You're going along, you're adding your programs, you're building your team, you're bringing in money, and somehow you look around and you're stuck. You are consistently raising the same amount year after year, and you can't quite seem to break through to that next level of funding. You are tweaking your budget and your fundraising plan. You're trying to adjust based on what you learn, but it's increasing by 10, 20, 30% each year. And that feels like a slog. Maybe you look around and the board members that you have had with you along the journey so far aren't writing huge checks or connecting you to people with huge checks, which, little hint, that's okay. But somehow they're not helping you grow. Maybe this reminds you of you. You look around and your team are running at a much higher capacity than you can sustain. You're doing amazing work, but everyone's on the brink of burnout. You are trying to put your available funding back into programs, but you're over capacity. You have a great team, but you're all maxed out. Maybe this is you. You're building the plane as you're flying it, and you can't quite balance income with capacity. Your income is lumpy. You feel like you're starting from scratch every few months. You really need to hire to build your team, but you're scared because you don't know if that funding is going to come in. You don't know how you're going to pay salaries. You know that you need new sources of funding. You just can't quite map out where they're going to come from. This is one I hear a lot. You feel like you're at this critical moment, this moment of shift or change or an inflection point, but you can't exactly see which next step is best. You're moving too fast. You're moving from one fire to the next. You have no time for vision or strategy or planning. Your calendar is packed with meetings and tasks, and it's hard to know which direction is best of all of the possibilities. And sometimes because you've been moving quickly, because you've been growing, you just need the dust to settle. You feel like you can't quite keep up. And your organization is running you instead of you running it. No matter which of these feels most right to you, you're in what I call a gear shift moment between where you were organizationally and as a leader and that next impact horizon for your organization. It's like if you know how to ride a bike and you're riding a bike or driving one of the old kinds of cars, the gear shift cars, and you shift gears. Everything feels just a little chaotic for a few moments before that next gear catches. Nonprofit growth is just like that. In every stage of growth, your organization is going to hit a point where you can't grow any farther using the existing set of skills and knowledge and systems that got you to where you are. You have to shift gears if you want to keep growing. And this is what I call a gear shift moment. And it's going to happen time and time again. And so you really have to start to recognize it so you know, okay, time to level up, time to shift gears. Now, I learned about this phenomenon firsthand, the hard way. I'll share a really quick story about my own gear shift moment, just in case any of this resonates or sounds familiar. So, 5 years into my organization, my second one, things felt great. They felt strong and familiar. I really felt like I had learned how to be an executive director. And in case you can hear the laughter in my voice, that's not actually a thing, but I thought it was. I thought I'd arrived. We were bringing in funding. We'd settled in nicely around $500,000 with a few full-time and part-time staff, some teaching assistants and consultants, great tight-knit team that I really loved working with. Our program partnerships were growing, and my goal was to keep scaling our impact. I wanted to be in more communities because the young people whose lives we were helping to transform, it was changing their lives. And I knew we could do more if we could continue to grow. So I threw a party. to celebrate 5 solid years, and the party was a smash. We had the silent auction, we gave out awards, public officials came, my board brought their friends. It was a great party. It was in this loft overlooking the water. I loved it. I'm patting myself on the back. I'm nailing this. I got this. So that's not the point of my story. My moment, my gear shift moment, came the next year. I looked around and we were stuck. We had not really raised any more significant money. Nothing had really come out of the event that we had thrown. I had thought it would be a catalyst for more donors and more money, but we had plateaued right around 600K. Our programs absolutely had grown, like I said, but my staff hadn't, and we were stretched thin. I was holding so much on my own plate that I was constantly dropping balls. I wasn't connecting with potential donors. I wasn't engaging with my board. My staff wasn't really seeing me. My board had grown and shifted to what I thought would be a quote unquote fundraising board to help us get to sort of the next 500,000. And that just wasn't playing itself out that way. I was learning that a quote unquote fundraising board also isn't a thing, right? An engaged board is what you need, not people who you think can write checks. So this is what I had built. And I was just using the playbook that I had always used. I was doing everything I'd done and it was exploding in my face. So here's my inflection point moment. Time comes to throw another party, end of the 6th year, and I went into autopilot. I sent out invites to everyone who had come the year before. I got great stuff for our silent auction, lined up the same DJ, literally used the same playbook I developed over the past 6 years to bring people together, celebrate our work, bring in new donors, etc. This year, the only people who came were, wait for it, one board member, my sister, one of her friends, and my 2 staff people, full-time staff people. I hadn't realized that the strategies that I'd used before just wouldn't cut it to get me to where I wanted to go next. And I didn't know the strategies I didn't know. And because I wasn't thinking in terms of growth stages, I wasn't asking the right questions about, wait, how do you plan a successful party for 150 people? It isn't just about sending out invites. Hint, it's not. I looked around and I realized that I needed to shift into whatever that next gear of leading my organization was going to look like. I needed to start thinking differently about our fundraising and our finance strategies, what I spent time on as a leader and a manager, who I was recruiting for the board and why, and what I asked of and expected from them. As I started to make this shift, our budget started to grow and it felt effortless. I focused on and built a strong leadership team to hold top with me so I could do high leverage work. I began to work with my board chair to build the board we really needed and a board culture that made them actual partners for me and my leadership team. Our thought leadership grew and we began attracting rather than me having to constantly chase new supporters and partners. I made concrete changes to shift into a new gear. And as a result, we doubled our budget in less than 2 years. Here's what I learned. If I had kept doing what I'd learned to do, what had gotten me to the 500,000 mark and just passed, to the point where we could even be thinking about expanding nationally like we were, I realized that if I kept doing that, I would stay there. That a $1 million organization is not simply a $600,000 organization with more money, and that I wasn't going to intuit or tweak my way from 600K to 1 million. If I kept doing the same things, I would keep running the same organization, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted to change the lives of more young people and transform more communities because they needed it. So if I was going to have more impact, I would need a bigger, stronger nonprofit. I was going to have to be willing and ready to do things differently than the way I had done them. And what I was seeing, what I've come to understand, and now what I actually teach inside my programs is that as organizations grow, they move through developmental stages, each requiring a different type of design, different ways of spending your time, different approaches to money, different leadership mindsets. one of the first people to go through my next level nonprofit accelerator, which I will tell you more about as we make our way through this training and towards the end, in case you want to work with me to navigate your own gear shift moment. One of the first women was LaFrey, and everything shifted for her when she invited a new way of thinking. For her, it was really a mindset. She says she actively looked for and invited a new way of leading. She asked so many questions. She came to the weekly coaching calls with questions. She slacked me questions. She asked me to look at her documents. She needed to figure out how to bring her board. We worked on that together. She realized that she needed to approach her learning differently, and it helped her triple her budget in under 2 years. She came into my program because she was hitting a wall, but she was willing to have her blind spots illuminated. She grew her board. She built a culture that has now supported active board co-visioning and planning. She came into the program at 250K, and her board just approved a $1.5 million budget for the first time. So now I want you to do a little thought experiment. Close your eyes and picture what your organization looks like 1 year from now. What does it look like if it's having the impact you wanted to have? Picture your bank statement. What's that number? What does your staff look like to support the kind of work that you're doing? What is the work that you're doing? How many people? How many communities? What role is your board playing? Who else in your network is helping you achieve this impact, and how? What does that look like? Do you have advisors? Do you have a junior board? How do you feel as a leader? I want you to think about all of these. This is how you craft a really clear vision for where you're going with your organization. What is one word that describes how you feel in this future where your organization is perfectly calibrated to have the impact you want? Write that down. I want you to keep that vision when you closed your eyes in your mind, because that's your why. That's what pushes you out of your comfort zone so that you can shift gears and make the changes that will allow your organization to keep growing. Ultimately, like me, you believe in the mission of your organization, and you want to make sure that your organization can grow to have the kind of impact you and your team and your board and your supporters are all working towards. That vision you saw when you closed your eyes is what scaling and growth mean to you. It's why you do it. So keep that in mind as we talk through what getting there will require. So we're going to talk about 3 critical gear shifts, some unlearnings, leaving behind and stepping into new ways of leading and thinking that will help you grow your revenue and your impact without overwhelm. So the first unlearning: don't set your growth milestones based only on your budget size, or even primarily on your budget size. Think about your growth in terms of stages of development. Basically, this means understand where you are in your nonprofit's life cycle. So the nonprofit life cycle is just a jargony way of saying the process by which organizations grow and sometimes decline through specific changes in their systems, processes, and elements. It's mechanized, right? There is a method to the seeming sort of art, madness, mystical, magicalness of growth. It's actually quite systematized. And there are 10 stages. And each stage or each phase of organizational development has specific characteristics and benchmarks. Expanding your thinking about growth from just sort of your budget, your number, to a more nuanced understanding of your stages of development is one of the most critical shifts or unlearnings, because it frames literally everything else about your growth. When you only consider your budget, you can only focus on the sort of next financial milestone. And it can lead you to focus on the wrong next financial milestone. Instead of knowing your current and next stage, you're focused on sort of where you are and how to iterate from there. Knowing your current and next stage is critical if you want to grow your organization the right way without wasting time and money and without overwhelm. What you want to do is the right thing at the right time. Now, each phase has hallmarks, and knowing those hallmarks, knowing the hallmarks of your stage, will actually help you get clarity about what to pay attention to about where you are and where to go next. Now, I'm going to walk through the stages here. I'm not going to go into the ones that have to do with decline or closure because that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about growth. So, the first is idea, birth, launch. Now, during this phase, you've identified a problem and your goal is to launch. The benchmarks here are understanding your problem, your working theory of change, having people who will help you clarify and test your mission and your vision, like volunteers and a startup board, and having a really initial rough estimate of what it will cost to launch your organization. Right. So this is really about the basics. Stage two is what we call infancy, or it's your startup phase. This is a very specific time. The organization is mostly the founder, and it is a phase marked by high energy, limited funding, and a newly acquired legal status. This could be 501c3, this could be a B Corp, some other form of social enterprise. Lots of organizations these days are playing around with different corporate structures, which is awesome. But the key here is you formalized that you have an institution. Right? The benchmarks here are what are the markers of that institution? A clear mission, a clear theory of change, an annual work plan with goals that guides your planning and your decisions. You have to be able to communicate your mission and your unique value proposition and your theory of change to supporters. Right? Some of the benchmarks of this phase are also job descriptions. Do you have an initial org chart that you're aiming towards? When you start to have those things, you can move on to the next stage. So this is what we call the childhood stage. This is post-startup. Now, you notice I don't assign numbers, budget sizes to any of these because you can have organizations, and I have organizations that come into my accelerator all the time that have been in, say, a post-startup stage for years, right? So it's not about the age of the organization. It's not about the budget size. It's have you achieved these benchmarks, right? So this is where the organization is walking and talking on its own. The institution is separate from the leader. And this is particularly relevant for founders. The goal of this stage is stability. Some of the benchmarks you want to look out for, and you start to see benchmarks in sort of three buckets: strategic clarity, organizational capacity, people, systems, and capital, your money. And so you want to identify your benchmarks in each of those three areas. For the benchmarks in this area, you're looking to have, in order to really graduate from the childhood phase, a 3-year or long-term strategic plan that includes a long-term vision, sort of like the vision we mapped out earlier in this webinar, priorities and goals. You want to have intentional program evaluation. Do you have a feedback loop so that you're actually testing what's happening in your programs against outcomes that you've identified? You want to have regular communication with your community about your impact. In terms of capacity, you're starting to want to have a team with differentiated roles, regular board meetings, board job descriptions. You're really starting to standardize the pillars of your organization, right? It's not all hands on deck. It's I hired you to do communications and fundraising, or I hired you to sort of own this area of work. And finally, the benchmarks financially are you want a true cost annual budget, right? What does it actually cost to do our work? Ideally, you have a robust pipeline of foundations that you are cultivating and building relationships with. And you know who your donors are. You have clear donor profiles. Those are some of the benchmarks to look out for in your childhood phase. And the reason that we start to differentiate between clarity, capacity, and capital is because you might find that you achieve benchmarks in one area and not in others. And that's okay, right? You can be in the childhood phase in terms of your money and in the early growth stage in terms of your strategic clarity. That's really normal. So your early growth stage, this is where the organizational pieces, those pillars we talked about, they're in place. You have a team, you have a board, and you're growing in earnest. That's what you're focused on, right? You know what your programs are, mostly, you know what your work is, and now you want to do it at scale, right? This is a tricky time. This is where gear shifts happen quickly. It's a time to be intentional and planful about your growth if you can, because growth almost always outpaces capacity and systems and money. Meaning, during this phase, one of the hallmarks of this phase is you will look around and think we're doing more than we can afford, or we're doing more than we have staff to sustain. So, the benchmarks to look out for here, or sort of the hallmarks or milestones that you want to achieve, just to name a few, you want clear alignment between your strategic goals and your program evaluation. Is what you're doing on the ground actually helping you achieve the goals that you've set for the long term? You want your evaluation to inform your programming, so there's a feedback loop, right? You want to make sure that you are honing your ability to communicate your impact to the donors that matter and the funders that matter. So the benchmarks around capital are really about differentiating and creating a strategic fundraising and resource growth strategy. Right? You want a true cost growth budget, not just what can we do this for or how much do I think we can raise, but what's the actual cost of our vision. And then you want a strategic fundraising plan. What's the best way for us to bring in revenue, right? Who are our ideal donors? Who are the right funders for us to be approaching? And that's where the strategic clarity comes in. Are we able to communicate effectively where we're going, what our strategies are to the right people? So at this stage, you start to see this interplay between these different areas of your organization, your strategic clarity, your capital, and finally, your capacity, right? Your benchmarks here are you want to establish a leadership team. Do you look around and the executive director is holding all of the workflows, is accountable for all of the outcomes? You want a leadership team that is being delegated to. You want a more structured plan for board self-governance. It doesn't mean you're always going to hit those goals. That can be a really tricky one. But what does it look like for the board to function separately from the organization? And finally, in this area, you want to start to develop a strong HR infrastructure, clear job descriptions, cementing key staff roles, focusing on culture. Now, the late growth stage is different from the early growth stage. A lot of people talk about sort of growth stage organizations, but I actually think that there are two stages here, right? The teenage years and then the young adult years. And so most of you probably this resonates with you, right? There is a difference between being, say, 18 and 22. You feel different. You're still growing in both, but by this late stage or young adult stage, the organization is already growing. You're sort of flying the plane and you're continuing to build it. And now you want to focus on stability and sustainability, right? So in the early growth stage, you're starting to figure out, how do we grow? How do we build the team we need? How do we get the board we need? What does our budget need to look like? Here, you're building the team. The team's growing. You're adding people. The board's growing. It's doing stuff. The programs are running. Stuff is happening. And it feels chaotic. And so this stage is where you want to start paying attention to things like SOPs, standard operating procedures. You want to pay attention to communication on your team, right? As the team becomes less flat and not everyone knows everything, how do you share information? What do workflows look like? For funding, this is a stage where you're going to need more general operating support. It's small, targeted program grants are not going to actually help you get stable and sustain your impact. You need general operating support. You need different kinds of donors. You're going to want to focus on your financials as a strategic tool for growth, not just looking at cash flow. So at this stage, your fundraising and your finances are really more strategic than tactical. Right? Your organizational capacity, that's that other bucket, is really about taking the org chart that you built during your early growth stage and clarifying lines of authority that are separate from the executive director, full ownership of workflows by your leadership team, full board self-governance, so that that differentiation frees each person on your team up to do what they are on the team to do. And especially as the executive director, it starts to free you up to look up and out of the organization, to build partnerships, to grow thought leadership, etc. And finally, if you do those things, you hit maturity. You hit the zone of maximization. This is where the organization is stable. It is mission aligned. It is rooted in systems and having a great impact. You're building a reputation. You have a point of view that people understand as unique and impactful. And this can be a happy place. Things are working, right? Systems are in place. And your goal is to deepen your impact. Now, here's the mistake that most organizations make. They don't pay attention to which stage of growth they're at, so they wind up aiming at the wrong goal. They don't ask the right questions about how to staff up or how to reach new donors. They misdiagnose problems with their board. They try to institute practices that their organizations are not yet set up to support. They don't know the next best place to aim their money or their time or their attention. And as a result, running the organization starts to feel heavy and hard and overwhelming. Now, you fix this mistake by knowing your stage. It will tell you the exact right milestones to shoot for and challenges to look out for. You want to make sure that you recognize the stage you're in so that you can set the right goals and address the right challenges. You want to make sure your goals, your plans, your actions are aligned with where you are. That will help you be most effective and smooth in your growth. So a quick example. If you're an infant organization with a 5-person board and 2 major donors, and you try to set up formal committees and officers on your board where you aim for a sustainable budget of $1 million, you're probably spending time and energy on the wrong goals. You're going to burn out your board. If you have a 5-person board, committees are going to make people feel stressed and overwhelmed. You're going to burn out your staff running fundraising campaigns that you're not set up to have you get to $1 million, right? So you want to know the next best step. That's the key. Know your stage of growth so you can accurately locate yourself and know the right benchmarks to be aiming for so that you can make the strategic shifts you need to make. Now, how do you do this? Baselining and intentional roadmaps. They're so, so important. Knowing where you are, assessing where you are, knowing what the benchmarks are, some of which I walked through here, and baselining. Where are we starting from? Right? Diagnosing where are we strong? Where are we not strong? Being intentional about the next best steps. When I worked with Carol, within a week, she and I had walked through the comprehensive diagnostic and roadmap that I do inside the Next Level Nonprofit program. And for her, given all of the things she had on her plate, it took the guesswork out of figuring out where she was. She described feeling like there are just so many options, so many things that I can do, but I don't know how to choose. They all feel equally relevant and important. And so just getting clarity about what she could ignore and where to pay attention to gave her calm and helped her move forward. Okay, so unlearning number 2, base your budget on the true cost of your vision for growth, not on what you need. So the unlearning is your budget based on what you need, and instead, you want to know the true cost of your vision for growth. You can't scale your organization if you don't think seriously and intentionally about your organization's money. Now, I get it. You can have all kinds of feelings about money. Most of us in our society do, and definitely in the nonprofit sector. Thinking about finances can feel scary, right? I don't have a background in finance. I didn't start a nonprofit to do finance. I've never seen financials. I don't really know what to do with financials. This is a big one. What if I get things wrong? Right? It can be overwhelming. I just don't know how to use all of the information in this QuickBooks account or on this financial dashboard. And so thinking about it just weighs you down. It can also just be annoying, right? I didn't do this work so that I could be mired in budgeting and reading cash flow statements. I want to do our North Star, our mission work, right? So most of us have some kind of feeling about some kind of way about finances. But I'm going to ask you to stick with me here. I'd like to make the case that our finances are actually just another part of the story that we tell about our programming, right? Our budget, our financials, they're storytelling tools. And they just use numbers to help people understand your vision the way your strategic plan uses words. This is where the power of true cost budgeting becomes critical. You must have a true cost budget if you are going to grow. A true cost budget is a budget that reflects the true cost of your plans for growth. Now, the big mistake that people make here is that they play the stretch game. They start with, what did I raise last year? A little stretch to that number. And consequently, they can never actually raise enough to expand their staff, to grow their programs, to provide the kinds of benefits they may want to their team. They don't actually have a budget that reflects the actual cost of running their organization. So they run their organizations in a way that runs them into the ground. Every week, I talk to a nonprofit CEO running his or her or their organization, and they are rocking it from a program perspective. But they're still struggling with payroll at some point every year, and they don't have enough funding to feel comfortable adding people to the team, adding new programming, experimenting the way they may want to. This is the what can I do this for mindset or consequence of that mindset. This is the reason this unlearning is so important. And it could be the number one thing that I see driving burnout and keeping people from really growing their budget and their impact. If year after year, you're creating a budget based primarily, or in some cases only, on committed revenue or on last year's numbers, then sadly, that's likely the amount you're going to raise again. Your budget is driven by what you've raised. And that is a problem for three reasons. It doesn't grow in a way that supports growth, right? Your budget doesn't grow in a way that supports growth of impact. You can't craft a realistic fundraising plan to bring in what you actually need. You're asking for what's in the budget, and the budget is what you think you can raise. So really, you're just asking for what you think you can raise, which isn't actually what you're going to need so that you don't feel underwater. And third, and even more importantly, you can't communicate your true need to your donors and funders. A true cost budget requires you to really ask yourself and be honest about the answer. What is the number that we need to be raising that would fund our vision and propel our organization forward? Whatever your concrete vision for growth and increased impact is, the number and location and scope of your programs, equitable pay for your team, more people on your team, more partnerships, more IT infrastructure, more nuanced marketing, help with strategic communications and thought leadership. There are costs associated with each element of that increased impact. Noting those, making your budget reflect those, that is a true cost budget, a budget that reflects the true cost of your vision. When Toya first started working in the accelerator, she knew that she was stuck financially, right? She came into the program with a budget that was very much about what her board was comfortable raising. And once she knew what she actually needed in order to grow, what her and her team were actually shooting for, she became one of the most competent fundraisers I have ever met. Her confidence came from her clarity. And so the way to operationalize this unlearning or this shift is to translate your strategic plan into a strategic budget. She and I, step by step, matched each element of her plan onto her budget so that they were literally telling the same story. It's like a book where on one side you have words and on another side you have a picture. They were telling the same story to donors and funders and stakeholders. And this became the basis for a brand new kind of fundraising strategy that wound up allowing her to double her revenue. She started to get income from donors and funders that felt like what she described, magic money, because it started to feel so much more effortless. And she started to feel more confident. She went from answering the question that we often get, how much are you trying to raise? By saying, well, last year we brought in 500 and we did a lot with that. We're hoping to bring in 550 this year because we have a waiting list for our programs, right? Something along those lines. So you went from that to a better story. I'm really glad you asked that, Sue. Our plan is to double the number of people reached through our programs in the next year, with a particularly deep focus on two communities. We found that this is where we're seeing increased need, and we really don't want to have a waiting list. So we're raising $750,000 this year to meet that need rather than having to have a waiting list. And I'd like to walk you through our growth plan so you can see exactly how a gift from you will fit into that vision, right? That's the kind of answer you can give when you actually know what it costs and how it's rooted in your strategic plan, right? And in the evaluation data that I talked about in the growth stage, right? When you are bringing in evaluation data to support your impact and your need. So the third unlearning or the third shift is going from all hands on deck and the leader does some part of everything to treating your time like an asset. Now, how many times have you thought to yourself, I don't have time to think about the big picture because I am always putting out fires? Or I don't really have the team that I need to delegate to because I'm always in the weeds of my organization right there with them. Or maybe I'm not making the new connections I need to be making and building the relationships I need to be building because I'm always in meetings or doing office work. So, this is an old adage that I love. Growing an institution requires you to work on your organization, not in your organization. The big mistake that leaders make here is that they run themselves into the ground, filling their calendars with meetings, editing documents, drafting emails and newsletters, putting out fires. They don't spend their time on high leverage activities. Now, what do I mean by high leverage? High leverage activities are the ones that drive revenue and impact, right? I'll say that again. High leverage activities are activities that drive revenue and impact. And you want more of those in your calendar. Think about it this way. You are on a path out of a forest. Your role, increasingly as the organization grows in size, complexity, and impact, is to be above the trees, looking way down the path, right? Future casting and strategizing about how to get down that path quickly and efficiently. High leverage activities are the things that are like a jet boost down the path. If you are down in the forest, in the weeds, you can't see down the path. You can't see any farther than anyone else on your team. So you want to be doing activities that allow you to be up above the trees, looking at the whole path and figuring out jet fuel ways to get down that path, high leverage activities. Now, what are the types of high leverage activities that you should be trying to maximize in your calendar? There are specific ones. Donor and funder relationships, starting new ones, cultivation, and stewardship. Fundraising, as you get bigger and your budget gets more or should get more dependent on general operating support, is all about relationships. It moves away from transactional, like just events or just campaigns, to the relational, rooted in relationships with donors and program officers at foundations. So, high leverage time is about initiating and building and strengthening relationships. Second, network expansion and strategic partnerships, formalizing and strengthening the kinds of connections to other organizations, to advisors, to mentors, etc., that broaden your strategic footprint. That gets you invited to the right conferences, to the working groups, that expands your programs into new parts of the city because you have relationships in those parts of the cities or state or country, depending on your goals. That's how you get invited to submit proposals to funders that don't accept unsolicited proposals, right? These relationships and partnerships. Third, strategic visioning and thinking and planning. You must make time for big picture, deep thinking about the direction of your organization. And finally, thought leadership. establishing your organization's footprint and point of view in the space that you inhabit so that you become a gatherer, not a hunter. You attract supporters, you attract donors, rather than having to do all of the outreach and all of the promotion. Now, each of these types of activities, when done correctly, has a high return on investment in terms of revenue and impact. For every hour that you spend, the effect on revenue and impact is outsized. That's what makes them high leverage. But here's the secret that no one tells you. Making time to work on your organization is not just about time management and delegation, although these are important. It's not just about being better with your time. So if you, like me, often beat yourself up about that, I'm giving you permission to let that one go. The key is actually to start thinking about and treating your time like an asset, the way you'd think about money. When you think about your time like an asset, you begin to treat it like other assets in your organization, your team, your cash. Now, an asset, your time can be saved, it can be spent, and it can be leveraged. The more strategically you leverage the asset, the higher return on investment you'll get. Let's say you had $1,000 to spend. You could spend $20 on each of 50 things or $200 on each of 5 things. Now, those 5 things are probably going to be higher value if chosen well. Time is the same because it's fixed. When you think about it like an asset, you realize that the brief time you spend on each of 50 things will probably not get you nearly as far as the longer, deeper time you spend on each of 5. So let's recap. You now know the 3 unlearnings or 3 shifts that will allow you to grow sustainably and without overwhelm. Knowing and being strategic about your stage of development, making sure you have a true cost budget that tells an accurate and compelling story about what your vision for impact looks like, and treating your time like an asset, engaging in high leverage activities. You understand why each of these shifts is so critical if you want to put yourself on a pathway to sustainable impact. Knowing where you are in your growth stage allows you to be really intentional and to ask the right questions and to make choices at the right time. It is the foundation of your strategic clarity. How your growth budget, while it seems like only one thing, is actually the blueprint for your growth because it frames your hiring, your program expansion, your resource allocation, and it opens the door for new kinds of fundraising conversations that are absolutely necessary for taking you to the next level. And finally, your time. The more you think about it like an asset, the more you'll be able to be surgical about how you spend it and where you aim it. What I want to do with this training is get super clear about what it really takes to scale, to begin to pull back the curtain on what it really takes to do that without overwhelm. There's a lot out there about growing and leading sustainably. And I want to boil it down to some crystal clear, high leverage drivers. You need these 3 shifts in particular. Thinking about and approaching growth strategy, money, and time differently will provide the foundation for the other shifts that you'll need to make as you navigate your various gear shifts. Now, if there's one thing that I've learned over the last 27 years of doing this work, it's that you can't reverse engineer true growth from the outside. It doesn't work to just look at larger organizations and try to copy what they're doing or Google traditional resources like how to run a board meeting, all of which these traditional resources study more established organizations with bigger, more complicated infrastructure. When you are in a growth stage and you're just looking on, you can't see the strategy and nuances and ups and downs that are happening below the surface of the organizations that you admire. You don't see the meetings and the difficult conversations with staff members who are no longer the right fit, or the changes in how the executive director uses their time, or shifts on the board, or the coaches and mentors that are being engaged and leveraged. You can't know the investments that organizations have made in their growth and what trade-offs they've had to make as they've grown. When you're running an organization, there is so much cobbling things together. so much trying to see into the black box of growth by looking at how other organizations are doing it, when the truth is every organization is a unique constellation of programs and staff and board and programs and funding style. The problem is that trying to cobble it together is exhausting and time consuming. And as an executive director, you already have to figure so much out on your own. It's also just not going to work. Right? No organization from 0 to 100 are you going to find $1 million in magic money and suddenly have a sustainable 7-figure organization. It's never happened in the 100 organizations that you're going to see, not without answering and navigating the questions that I've highlighted in this training. Right? Some organizations answer them and grow quickly, and for some others, it takes more time. My point is that nothing that I've talked about today is theory. There is a method to the madness and seeming chaos of growth. There is a path that you can follow, an uncluttered, not overwhelming process for growth that you can apply to your organization. Now, in the beginning, I asked you to close your eyes and picture what high impact success looked like. Maybe you pictured consistent revenue month after month. Maybe you pictured funding that's steadily increasing and not stagnant and plateauing. Maybe you pictured a strong bench, a leadership team, and an amazing group of people that are on the journey with you that you can delegate to so that you can look up and out, be over the trees, looking down the path and doing high leverage work. Maybe you pictured a really engaged and cohesive board that are thought partners and champions and ambassadors out in the world, spreading the news and helping you expand your network and bring in revenue. I'm pretty sure most of you thought about having more time for vision and plan and strategy for growth. That's what I am doing with the Nonprofit Impact Accelerator program. And if you're ready to actually scale your organization, I would love to invite you to apply. The Accelerator is a 6-month coaching and training program that helps nonprofits leaders go from feeling overwhelmed by everything we talked about today, the messiness of growth, to having a clear path to sustainability so that you can 2x or 3x or even 10x your reach and your impact. I walk you through the exact playbook that I've used in both of my organizations as board chaired organizations and as a coach and a strategist and professor for hundreds of nonprofits around the world to help them build systems, staff, board, and the budget they need to scale quickly and without burning out. It's the only program like this where we help you pull together the various strands of your organization that are so often kept apart: strategic planning, fundraising planning, budgeting, growing your board, hiring and expanding your staff. You get support around not just each of these areas, but how they layer and interact in an interconnected way. My goal is to take the guesswork out of growing by showing you how to integrate all of these different aspects of your organization. How do you actually talk to potential major donors about your vision to get them excited? How do you build a leadership team that works? What are the exact emails and tools that you use to re-engage lapsed donors or to get board members out there fundraising? So here's how the accelerator works. We start with a personalized growth map. I use a comprehensive diagnostic tool that I've used with foundations all over the country to assess the health of their grantees. You get an individualized growth map that pinpoints where you're strong and exactly where you want to focus for the next 6 months. Everyone in your organization gets access to a comprehensive training curriculum focused on core growth areas. The idea here is that one person, you, can't hold all the learning. So we bring your whole team on board. We begin to free your time for your own development, your own skill building, and high leverage activities. And we align the curriculum with your growth plan so that as part of your growth plan, while you get access to the full curriculum, everyone on your team and your board gets access to it. We actually curate a set of step-by-step videos, audio trainings, and deep dives specifically to help you achieve the growth goal that we've identified. In addition to the curriculum, you get coaching support. lots of great coaching support. You support your learning and forward movement through weekly group coaching with me. I answer all of your questions. You get real-time help with challenges, or we can just talk through a skill that you really want support around. These calls are great. You can submit your questions in advance so that if you can't come, you can watch the replay. And this has just been a wonderful benefit. The community is great. You benefit from the other leaders in the community. They can help you with your challenges. You can share wins. And trust me, having those people walking alongside you on the journey makes everything feel easier. Now, the coaching and support also includes personal one-on-one coaching with our expert coaches in residence, and that happens every month. This is both a coaching and accountability space. You have a thought partner and an accountability space to help you make sure that if for no other period of time in the month, you have time, one-on-one dedicated time to help you push through your leadership challenges and keep moving forward towards your growth goal. I've mentioned implementation and execution. You get access to a full library of examples and models and templates and tools so that you are never starting from scratch or recreating the wheel as you work to implement what you learned. We have model language for lapsed donors, model campaign guides with step-by-step instructions for different kinds of events. We have major donor scripts, agendas for board meetings, worksheets to activate advisors, activities to do to build staff culture. You name it, we have it. And if we don't, we will get it for you. And finally, the accelerator offers a doorway into a broader network of experts. In addition to the one-on-one support from our expert coaches, we have ongoing opportunities to engage with our other experts in residence, former executive directors and founders, funders, corporate leaders, and more. These range from masterclasses and open Q&As to dedicated deep dive trainings and one-on-one implementation support, as well as a comprehensive library of discounts on implementation from things like copywriting to grant auditing. Just a way to bring together different perspectives and access to a network so you don't have to do all the work yourself. Basically, it's everything you need to grow in a way that is sustainable and that will get you to the impact you want to have. My goal is to give you the hands-on support you need to get unstuck and out of the messiness of growth and onto a clear path. I mentioned in the beginning that I love working in mission-driven communities and doing social change work. Supporting mission-driven work is my purpose and my passion, and I truly love finding ways to make the work of organizations that are accepted into the accelerator stronger and to make the leader stronger. I would love to work with you and support you and to get you these resources when you're ready to level up. So apply Richie-Babbage.com/next level nonprofit to see if we're a good fit to work together.